When my stepmother kicked me out on my 18th birthday, she handed me a set of rusty keys and a deed to a worthless, abandoned feed store 3 states away. What she didn't know was that my father had left me something else inside it, something that would change not just my future, but my entire understanding of the past. If you've ever felt lost or been told you're not worth much, this story is for you. Stick around, and if it resonates, hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who've had to find their own way home. The front door clicked shut behind me, with the sound of a well-oiled machine doing its final, definitive job. It was a heavy door, solid oak, a door my father had picked out years ago. He'd liked the weight of it, the sense of permanence. Now, all it felt like was the closing of a vault. I stood on the porch, the same porch where I'd scraped my knee as a kid, where Dad had taught me how to tie my shoes, and I held a cardboard box in my hands. Inside was my inheritance. My backpack, containing 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the worn paperback I'd been reading for a month, was slung over one shoulder. It felt heavier than the box. It was my 18th birthday. There was no cake, no card. Just a brief, sterile meeting in the living room that Karen, my stepmother, had redecorated in shades of gray and beige a month after the funeral. She'd sat opposite me, a file folder on the glass coffee table between us. She didn't look at me, not really. She looked at a point just past my shoulder, as if I were a slightly inconvenient ghost. "Leo," she'd said, her voice as crisp and devoid of warmth as the room around us. "As you know, today you are legally an adult." I nodded. The silence stretched. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a sound that had been the backdrop to my life for as long as I could remember.
"Your father's estate was complicated," she continued, finally nudging the cardboard box across the table with 2 perfectly manicured fingers. "There wasn't much left. In fact, there were significant debts. I've spent the last 6 months settling what I can." She took a breath, a shallow intake of air that seemed more about punctuation than necessity. "He did, however, have one asset in his name, solely in his name. It's a piece of commercial property in Montana. He bought it years ago. A bad investment, one of many." I stared at the box. It was a standard banker's box, slightly dusty. My name, Leo, was written on the side in her neat, impersonal script. "The deed is in there," she said, "and the keys. It's an old feed store. It's been abandoned for years. According to the lawyer, it's worthless. Less than worthless, actually."
It carries its own debt, but it is legally yours. My legal and financial obligations to you are now concluded. The words hung in the air. My legal and financial obligations. Not, "You'll always have a home here." Not, "We're family." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I'd been living on borrowed time since Dad died. I knew that. I was a relic of a life she was desperate to leave behind. I saw it in the way she'd packed up his photos, the way she changed the subject when I mentioned him. I was the last, breathing piece of him left in her house. "So I have to leave?" I asked. My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. She finally met my eyes. There wasn't anger there, or even malice. Just a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. A weariness that had me in its crosshairs. "You're an adult now, Leo. You need to make your own way. It's what your father would have wanted." That was the line that cut the deepest. She had no idea what my father would have wanted. For the last 2 years of his illness, she had barely spoken to him, moving through the house like a phantom, her presence announced only by the clink of a glass or the soft click of her bedroom door. He had been my responsibility. The late nights, the medication schedules, the quiet conversations when he was lucid enough to talk. Me, not her. I didn't argue. There was no point. Arguing with Karen was like punching water. You just got tired and nothing changed. I stood up, took the box, and walked toward the hall. She didn't get up. She just sat there, a statue of tasteful grief and forward-thinking practicality. I grabbed my backpack from the bottom of the stairs where I'd left it that morning, almost as if I'd known. I walked to the heavy oak door and I didn't look back. I pulled it open, stepped out into the cool October air, and let it swing shut. The click was the last word in a conversation we'd been having for a year. I was out. I was 18. I was free, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. I looked down at the box in my hands. A worthless feed store in Montana. Happy birthday to me. I walked until the streetlights came on, with no destination in mind. The neighborhood I grew up in suddenly felt alien, the familiar houses like the faces of strangers. Each lit window was a glimpse into a life that wasn't mine. A family sitting down to dinner, a TV flickering, the warm glow of belonging. I ended up at a bus stop, sitting on the cold plastic bench under the buzz of a fluorescent light that attracted a frantic circle of moths. I didn't know which bus to take. I didn't know where to go. The city was a vast, indifferent ocean, and I had just been set adrift in a leaky boat with a box for an anchor. Eventually, the chill seeped into my bones. I used my phone to find the cheapest motel in a 20-mile radius. It was called the Starlight Inn, a name far too romantic for the reality of the place. It sat on a commercial strip of road, wedged between a pawn shop and a 24-hour laundromat. The sign flickered, the S and T in Starlight dark, so it just read, Arlight Inn. Appropriate. The room smelled of stale smoke and bleach. The bedspread was a thin, scratchy thing with a pattern of faded brown flowers. I dropped my backpack on the floor and placed the cardboard box on the small, laminate desk. For a long time, I just stared at it. It felt like a bomb and a lifeline all at once. It was the last thing from my father. Even if it came via Karen, it was from him. With a deep breath, I pulled open the flaps. The contents were exactly as she'd described, but seeing them felt different, heavier. On top was a large, stiff document folded in four. The deed. I unfolded it. Miller's Feed and Grain, it read, followed by an address on a road I'd never heard of in a town I couldn't place. Garnet Creek, Montana. My father's name was there, Robert Leo Miller, as the sole proprietor. My full name is Leo Robert Miller. He'd named me after himself, backward. Beneath the deed was a Ziploc bag. Inside, a ring of keys. They were old, heavy, and pitted with rust, the kind of keys you see in old movies. One was large and ornate, for a padlock. The others were smaller, for standard doors. A small, yellowed tag was attached to one with the number 3 written on it in faded ink. And then I saw it, at the very bottom of the box, almost hidden in the corner. A small, plain manila envelope. It was sealed. My name, Leo, was written on the front. I knew the handwriting instantly. It was my dad's. It was the shaky, slightly spidery script from his last year, but it was his. My breath caught in my throat. Karen hadn't put this in the box. She wouldn't have. This was from him. He had put this in here whenever he'd first put this box together, and she had never even looked. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was thin, just a single piece of paper inside, I guessed. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. It was a message from the other side of a chasm I could never cross again. A ghost's whisper. Before I could, I knew I had to make a call. There was one person who might have answers, who operated in the world of deeds and debts that felt so foreign to me. Mr. Abernathy, my father's lawyer. He was a kind man, if a bit formal. He'd always treated me with a quiet respect that other adults in my life often skipped. I found his number online and dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional, even at what was now almost 8 o'clock at night. "Mr. Abernathy, it's Leo Miller." "Leo," he said, and I heard the surprise in his voice, but also a hint of warmth. "I was sorry to hear you'd moved on. Karen called me this afternoon." Moved on. A delicate way of putting it. "Yeah, listen, I'm sorry to call so late, but I have a question about the inheritance. The feed store in Montana." There was a pause. I heard the shuffling of papers. "Ah, yes. Miller's Feed and Grain. Ahem. Leo, my advice to you, as it was to Karen, is to divest yourself of that property as quickly as possible. It's not an asset. It's a liability." "What do you mean?" "Your father purchased it about 10 years ago," he explained, his tone shifting into the clear, patient rhythm of a lawyer explaining something complex. "He secured a private loan against the property itself. He made payments for a while, then they became erratic, and for the last 2 years, they stopped altogether. The lender has been sending foreclosure notices for months. The debt owed is now significantly more than the assessed value of the land and the structure combined. Frankly, the building itself is probably a teardown." "So I owe money?" The cold knot in my stomach was back, colder and tighter than before. "Technically, the debt is tied to the property, not to you personally. If you sell it, the proceeds would go to the lender." You might be able to negotiate with them, sell it for scrap and land value, and they might forgive the remainder of the note as a write-off. It would be a clean break. That would be my professional recommendation. A clean break. The same words Karen used. It sounded neat. It sounded sensible. It sounded like letting go of the last thing my father had ever given me for a handful of nothing. "Who's the lender?" I asked. "Is it a bank?" "No, that's one of the oddities. It's a private holding company, Sunstone Acquisitions. They're notoriously aggressive. Not a group you want to be in arrears with, son." The words sent a shiver down my spine. Sunstone Acquisitions. It sounded faceless and immense. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy," I said, my mind reeling. "I appreciate the advice." "Of course, Leo. If you decide to sell, call my office. We can handle the paperwork. And, for what it's worth, son, I'm sorry. Your father was a good man." After I hung up, the motel room felt smaller, the walls closing in. So that was it. A worthless building, a mountain of debt, and an aggressive lender. Karen was right. The smart move was to walk away. Sell it, sign the papers, and use the few $100s I had to try and find a room somewhere, a job, a life. But then my eyes fell on the small manila envelope on the desk, his handwriting. I picked it up, my thumb tracing the letters of my name. With a sense of finality, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of notepad paper, folded once. The message was short, just a few lines in that familiar, shaky hand. "Leo, go there, son. I know it doesn't make sense, but please, just go. Don't listen to anyone else. Don't sell. Not yet. Trust me, one last time. Just go. Key number 3 opens the office. Love, Dad." I read it once, then twice, then a third time. My vision blurred with tears. It wasn't an explanation. It was a plea, a request for faith from beyond the grave. Trust me one last time. It was the same thing he'd whispered to me in the hospital, his voice thin as paper, when he'd made me promise to take care of things after he was gone. I thought he'd meant the house, Karen, myself. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was what he'd meant. The lawyer's sensible advice echoed in my head. A clean break. Karen's cold dismissal. Make your own way. And then my father's words, "Just go." I looked at my meager belongings. I looked at the deed to a worthless property. I had nothing to lose and a promise to keep. The decision wasn't logical. It wasn't sensible. But it was the only one I could make. I was going to Montana. The first step was figuring out how to get there. Montana was over 1,000 miles away. A bus ticket would cost more than I had. I looked around the grim motel room, my gaze landing on my backpack. Inside, tucked away in its original box, was my only possession of any real value: a brand new PlayStation 5. My dad had bought it for me for my 17th birthday, just before the final downturn in his health. He'd saved for months. We only got to play it together twice before he was too weak to hold the controller. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to even turn it on. It was a monument to a future that never happened. Selling it felt like a betrayal. It was the last real gift. The last piece of him from a time when things were almost normal. But his letter was more important. His last words. Just go. The console was a memory. The feed store, whatever it was a mission. The next morning, I walked to the pawn shop next to the motel. The bell above the door chimed a sad, tinny note. The man behind the counter had a tired face and eyes that had seen every hard luck story in the book. He barely looked at me as I unpacked the console. He plugged it in, saw that it worked, and offered me $300. I knew it was worth more than twice that, but I wasn't in a position to bargain. I took the cash. It felt cold in my hand. I walked out of the pawn shop and straight to the bus station. The ticket to Butte, Montana, the closest major stop to Garnet Creek, cost me most of the money. I was left with less than $50. Enough for snacks on the road and not much else. The bus ride was a long, hypnotic blur. 2 days of watching America scroll past the greasy window. The crowded, frantic energy of the city slowly gave way to the endless, flat geometry of the Midwest. I saw sprawling suburbs with identical houses, then vast fields of corn, then wide-open plains where the sky felt bigger than the earth. The landscape became a reflection of my own internal state, vast, empty, and uncertain. I didn't talk to anyone. I sat with my headphones on, even when the music wasn't playing, a universal sign to be left alone. I ate stale crackers and drank lukewarm water from my bottle. The other passengers were a collection of ghosts like me, people in transit from one life to another, their faces etched with weariness or faint, desperate hope. I was just another anonymous face in the crowd, a boy with a backpack and a box of rusty keys heading toward a mystery. The further west we went, the more the land began to change. The flat plains buckled and rose into rolling hills, then into the jagged, purple-blue outlines of distant mountains. It was beautiful and intimidating. I'd never seen anything like it. The world I knew was concrete and steel, a grid of streets and buildings. This was something else entirely. Wild, untamed. I finally got off the bus in Butte, a city that felt like it was clinging to the side of a mountain. It was an old mining town, and you could feel the history in the brick buildings and the steep, winding streets. But Garnet Creek wasn't in Butte. According to the faded map I'd looked at on my phone, it was another 50 miles out, a tiny speck in a valley surrounded by national forest. There were no buses that went there. I stood outside the bus station, the mountain air thin and cold. I felt a surge of panic. I was so close, but I was stranded. I had $20 left. Not enough for a cab, even if I could find one willing to go that far. I started walking along the main road heading out of town, my thumbs stuck out half-heartedly. I felt foolish and desperate. Cars and trucks roared past, their drivers giving me wary glances. I walked for what felt like hours, the sun starting to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. I was about to give up, to turn back and find some shelter for the night, when an old, beat-up flatbed truck slowed down and pulled over onto the gravel shoulder ahead of me. The driver, a man with a weathered face and a thick gray beard, leaned across the passenger seat and rolled down the window. "You look like you're a long way from home, kid." "Something like that," I said, my voice hoarse. "Where are you headed?" "A place called Garnet Creek. I don't know if you—" He cut me off with a short, humorless laugh. "Garnet Creek? Ain't much left of it. But it's on my way. Hop in, throw your gear in the back." Relief washed over me so intensely I felt lightheaded. I tossed my backpack onto the flatbed and climbed into the cab. It smelled of diesel, coffee, and old vinyl. "Name's Sal," he said, grinding the gears and pulling back onto the road. "Leo. So what's a kid like you going to Garnet Creek for? Visiting family?" "Something like that," I said again. "My father, he left me a property out there." Sal glanced at me, his expression shifting from curiosity to something like pity. "Don't tell me," he said, his voice low. "The old Miller feed store." My heart skipped a beat. "You know it?" "Everyone knows it. Sits right at the edge of the valley. Been empty for a decade. Folks say the guy who bought it just vanished. Guess that wasn't true." He looked at me again, more closely this time. "Miller, you said. You must be his boy." I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. We drove in silence for a while as the last of the light faded from the sky. Sal seemed to understand I didn't want to talk. He just drove, the truck's engine a steady rumble. "Tough country out here, Leo," he said finally, his eyes on the dark ribbon of road illuminated by our headlights. "Used to be a lot of logging, some mining, but the mill shut down 20 years ago. The mines petered out. Now it's just folks who are too stubborn to leave, or people from the city buying up vacation spots. Not much in between. Not much work. A place like that feed store, it's a relic. A ghost of a time that ain't coming back." His words should have been discouraging. They should have confirmed everything Karen and Mr. Abernathy had said. But they didn't. Instead, they made the place sound like my father. A stubborn relic. A ghost. I felt a strange sense of kinship with the building I'd never seen. About an hour later, Sal slowed the truck and pointed. "There she is. Your inheritance." I leaned forward, peering through the dusty windshield. And there it was. Set back from the road, silhouetted against a sky thick with stars, was a long, hulking building. It was bigger than I'd imagined, with a high, peaked roof that sagged in the middle like a tired old man's shoulders. Even in the dark, I could see it was in rough shape. A few windows were boarded up, and the shadows made it look like a great, sleeping beast. The words, "Miller's Feed and Grain," were painted on the side in letters that were faded and peeling, barely legible in the moonlight. It looked exactly like what it was, abandoned, neglected, forgotten. Sal pulled the truck to a stop at the entrance to a gravel driveway. "This is as far as I go," he said. "You sure you're going to be all right out here, kid?" "I'll be all right," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "There's a diner in town, about 2 miles down the road, the Garnet Grill. It's the only thing open this time of night, if you need a hot meal." "Thanks, Sal, for the ride, for everything." "Don't mention it." He gave me a long, searching look. "Good luck, Leo Miller." I hopped out of the cab, grabbed my backpack, and watched as the truck's red taillights disappeared down the road, leaving me in an immense, profound silence. The only sound was the wind, a low, mournful whisper that seemed to flow down from the dark mountains surrounding the valley. It rustled through the tall, dry grass and whistled around the corners of the old building. I stood there for a long moment, just taking it in. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth, a world away from the city smog I was used to. Above me, the Milky Way was a brilliant, shimmering smear across the blackness. I'd never seen so many stars. It was beautiful, and it made me feel incredibly small. Finally, I turned my attention to the building, my property, my inheritance, my problem. I walked up the gravel driveway, my footsteps sounding unnervingly loud in the quiet. A large chain and a heavy, rusted padlock secured the two massive sliding doors at the front. I fumbled in my pocket for the Ziploc bag of keys. The big, ornate key looked like it would fit, but when I tried it, the lock was frozen solid with rust. It wouldn't budge. For a second, I felt a wave of despair. To come all this way only to be locked out. Then I remembered my dad's note. Key number 3 opens the office. I walked along the side of the building, running my hand along the rough, weathered wood siding. About halfway down, I found a smaller, normal-sized door. A single pane of glass at the top was cracked and covered in grime. Above it, a barely visible, hand-painted sign read, "Office." My heart started to pound. This was it. I found the key with the yellowed tag, the number 3 still faintly visible. I slid it into the lock. It felt gritty, and I had to jiggle it, but then I felt a click. A solid, mechanical sound that echoed in the night. I turned the knob, and with a groan of protest, the door swung inward, opening into a pitch-black space. I hesitated on the threshold, then pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene that was frozen in time. The office was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. Everything, a large metal desk, a filing cabinet, a wooden chair on creaky casters, was covered in a thick, uniform layer of gray dust. It was like the aftermath of a volcanic eruption. Cobwebs, thick as cotton, hung in every corner. On the wall, a calendar featured a picture of a majestic waterfall. It was turned to August 2010, 10 years ago. The year my dad bought the place. The year, I now realized, that the strange phone calls had started, the hushed arguments with my mother before she left, the beginning of the slow, quiet unraveling of my family. The air was heavy and stale, thick with the smell of old paper, mildew, and something else, the scent of absence. I stepped inside, my boots leaving clean prints in the dust on the floorboards. The flashlight beam danced across the room. A black rotary phone sat on the desk, its coiled cord coated in dust. Next to it was a wire basket filled with mail. I picked up the top envelope. It was a final notice from the power company, dated 9 years earlier. The rest were the same. Bills, junk mail, and, near the bottom, thick envelopes with intimidating letterheads. Foreclosure warnings from Sunstone Acquisitions. Mr. Abernathy was right. It was all just as he'd said. Worthless. A financial black hole. I felt a pang of disappointment, so sharp it was almost physical. Had my dad's note just been a final, desperate act of a dying man? A confused wish? Had I come all this way, sold his last gift to me, for nothing but a dusty room and a pile of old debt? I sank into the creaky office chair, sending up a puff of dust that made me cough. I ran my hand over the gritty surface of the desk. My fingers brushed against the handle of one of the wide drawers. I pulled. It was locked. I tried the other one, locked too. I went through the ring of keys again, trying each of the smaller ones in the desk locks. None of them worked. Frustration mounted in my chest. I was about to give up, to just curl up on the floor and wait for morning, when my light caught the glint of something metal in a pen holder on the desk. A tarnished silver letter opener. On impulse, I slid the tip of the opener into the crack above the top drawer and pried. The old metal lock was weak. With a splintering crack, it gave way. I pulled the drawer open. It was almost empty, except for one thing. Lying right in the center was a thick, legal-sized envelope. It was sealed with wax, the kind I'd only ever seen in movies. And on the front, in my father's unmistakable, shaky script, were 2 words. For Leo. My breath hitched. This was it. This had to be it. This was the reason he'd sent me here. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the wax seal. Inside was a sheaf of papers, at least a dozen pages, filled with his handwriting. I pulled them out, my heart pounding against my ribs. At the top of the first page, he'd written a title, The Truth. I took a deep breath, angled my phone's light onto the page, and began to read. My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, that I am gone. For that, my son, I am more sorry than words can ever say. The thought of leaving you alone in this world has been the great terror of my final years. Second, it means you did what I asked. You came here. You trusted me. Thank you. That trust means more to me than you will ever know. I know you have questions. I know you are probably sitting in that dusty office feeling confused, maybe angry, and wondering what this is all about. Karen and the lawyers will have told you this place is a worthless money pit. In a way, they are right. But they are also wrong. This place isn't an investment. It's a sanctuary. Or, more accurately, it was meant to be one. There are things about my life, about my past, that I never told you. I was ashamed. And I was scared. I wanted to protect you from it, to give you the normal, quiet life I never had. Before I met your mother, before I was a mild-mannered accountant, I was a different person. I was young, arrogant, and stupid. I got involved with some very dangerous people. It wasn't anything violent. It was financial. I was a junior analyst at a firm in Chicago, and I was good with numbers. Too good. I found a way to skim fractions of cents from thousands of transactions, routing them into an offshore account. It was a ghost operation. A few of the senior partners were in on it. It was their scheme. I was just the kid who built the engine. I thought I was a genius. For 2 years, it worked. We made a lot of money. But I had a crisis of conscience. I saw the damage it was doing, the lives that were being quietly ruined on the other end of those transactions. I wanted out. They told me there was no getting out, but I was the only one who truly understood the system I'd built. I found a back door. I didn't just leave. I took the records. I copied every ledger, every transaction, every secret account number. It was my insurance policy. I threatened to expose them if they ever came after me. And for a long time, it worked. I disappeared. I moved, changed my name slightly, met your mother, and you were born. I became the man you knew, Robert Miller, the quiet dad who was good at math. I had to stop reading. I lowered the pages, my mind reeling. My father? My quiet, gentle, law-abiding father? A criminal? Involved with dangerous people? It was impossible. It was like being told the sky was green. My entire image of him, the bedrock of my world, was fracturing. He was the man who'd patiently taught me long division, who'd built model airplanes with me at the kitchen table, whose biggest vice was doing the crossword puzzle in ink. This story didn't fit. I read on, my hands trembling. I thought that part of my life was buried forever. But they never forgot, and they never forgave. About 10 years ago, one of them found me. His name doesn't matter. He was just a messenger. They didn't want the old records anymore. Technology had moved on. They wanted money. They knew I had a family. They knew I had you. You were my weakness, Leo, and they exploited it. It started small, payments to keep them quiet, but the demands grew. The money Karen thought I was losing in bad investments, the reason I had to sell your mother's car, the reason we never took those vacations I promised, it was all going to them. It was a slow, steady bleed. They were draining me, and they were enjoying it. It was their revenge. When I got sick, I knew my time was running out.
I knew I wouldn't be able to protect you for much longer. I became terrified of what they would do when I was gone. Would they come after you? Try to extort you, believing I had left you a fortune? I had to create a new story. A story of a man who died broke. A man who left nothing behind but debt.
That's why I bought this feed store. I used the last of my real savings. I bought it through a shell corporation, so it was hard to trace back to me directly. Then I created the loan. The lender, Sunstone Acquisitions, is another shell company. It's owned by me, or rather by my estate. The foreclosure notices, the aggressive letters, I wrote them myself. I was building a fiction, a paper trail of failure. I needed this property to look so toxic, so worthless, that no one would ever want it. Especially not Karen, who I knew would sell it off for $1 if she could. I needed it to fall to the one person I could trust to follow my instructions, even if they didn't make sense. I needed it to fall to you. This place, Leo, this broken-down building, was meant to be your escape hatch. A place off the grid, legally worthless, a place no one would ever look for you. Because I hid something here, something to give you a fighting chance. You have to find it. It's not in the office. It's in the main building. They always said I couldn't see the forest for the trees, but sometimes you need to look at the floor, not the ceiling. Look for where the weight of it all comes to rest. I love you, son, more than you know. I'm sorry for the lies. Everything I did to protect you. Be brave, Dad. The letter fell from my fingers onto the dusty floor. The small office, which had felt like a tomb, now felt like the epicenter of an earthquake that had just demolished my entire life. My father wasn't the simple, slightly unlucky man I thought he was. He was a man living a secret life of fear, a man being blackmailed, a man who had spent his last years not just fighting a disease, but fighting a hidden war to protect me. The shame I'd carried for so long, the feeling that I was a burden, that his financial troubles were somehow tied to the expense of raising me, it all evaporated, replaced by a wave of grief so profound it buckled me over in the chair. I cried. I cried for the years he'd suffered in silence. I cried for the fear he must have felt every time the phone rang. I cried for the quiet, heroic man I had never truly known. I cried for the lie he'd been forced to live and the truth he'd died to protect. And I cried because, sitting there in the cold, dark, dusty shell of his last desperate plan, I had never felt so alone. I sat there for what must have been an hour, the silence of the room broken only by my own ragged breathing. The initial shock had subsided, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. My father's words echoed in my head. This place isn't an investment. It's a sanctuary. He hadn't left me a burden. He had left me a shield. The peeling paint, the sagging roof, the fake debt, it was all camouflage. A fortress disguised as a ruin. And he'd left me a task. You have to find it. My grief began to slowly, imperceptibly, morph into something else. A flicker of purpose. A cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just here to claim an inheritance anymore. I was here to finish my father's last chapter. To uncover the final piece of the puzzle he'd laid out for me. I had to stop for a minute. Just sit there in that dusty chair and breathe. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought was true just fell apart? When you realized the story you were told, the very foundation of your life, was a lie designed to protect you. It's a heavy, disorienting feeling. It's like the floor drops out from under you, and you're just free-floating in the dark. If you know that feeling, if you've ever had to rebuild your reality from scratch, let me know in the comments. It's a heavy thing to carry alone. And if you're new here, and this story is hitting home for you, maybe think about subscribing. We talk about the hard stuff here, the things people don't usually want to talk about. Because sometimes, sharing the weight is the only way to be able to carry it. Now, back to that office. The flashlight on my phone was starting to die. I rummaged through the desk drawers, the ones I'd forced open. In the back of one, my fingers closed around a heavy metal object. A flashlight. A big, old mag light. I clicked the switch. Nothing. I unscrewed the bottom. The batteries inside were corroded. I searched the rest of the desk and the filing cabinet, a frantic energy now propelling me. In a drawer labeled Miscellaneous, I found a dusty, unopened pack of D-cell batteries. Their expiration date was 5 years ago, but they were my only hope. I swapped them into the flashlight, screwed it back together, and clicked the switch. A powerful yellow-white beam cut through the darkness. It felt like a small victory, a tiny sign that I was on the right path. Armed with a reliable light, I left the office and stepped into the main part of the feed store. The beam from my flashlight barely penetrated the cavernous space. It was immense, far bigger than it looked from the outside. The roof soared 30 feet above me, held up by a skeleton of massive wooden beams. The air was thick with the earthy smell of old grain, dust, and time. Ghostly shapes of machinery loomed in the darkness. Conveyor belts, bagging stations, and towering metal hoppers stood silent and shrouded in cobwebs. It was like a cathedral dedicated to a forgotten god of agriculture. My father's clue replayed in my mind. Look for where the weight of it all comes to rest. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the vast wooden floor. It was covered in a layer of dirt and chaff. How was I supposed to find anything in this mess? I started at one end and began a systematic search, my light tracing back and forth across the floorboards. Most of them were old, dark wood, scarred and worn from decades of use. I spent over an hour walking the grid, my boots crunching on the debris. My hope began to wane. The scale of the place was overwhelming. Then, I remembered the other part of the clue. They always said I couldn't see the forest for the trees. But sometimes you need to look at the floor, not the ceiling. I had been so focused on the floor, I hadn't considered what was above it. I tilted the flashlight beam upwards. Directly in the center of the warehouse stood the largest piece of equipment in the building, a massive, cone-shaped grain hopper. It was at least 2 stories tall, a giant of rusted metal, bolted to the heavy support beams in the ceiling. It was designed to hold tons of grain, funneling it down to the bagging station below. The weight of it all. This had to be it. I directed the beam down to the floor, directly beneath the hopper. And there it was. A square section of floorboards about 4 feet by 4 feet. The wood was different, lighter in color, newer. It hadn't been weathered and worn like the rest of the floor. It had been replaced. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the spot. There was just one problem. The hopper's massive dispensing chute, a huge metal funnel, was positioned directly over the center of that square, no more than a foot off the ground. There was no way to lift the boards. The entire machine was an anchor, pinning my father's secret to the ground. I pushed against the chute. It didn't move. Of course it didn't. It was solid steel, probably weighed a few hundred pounds on its own, and it was attached to a machine that weighed tons. I felt a surge of helpless frustration. Was this some kind of cruel joke? A final, impossible test? I refused to be defeated. I circled the giant machine, examining it from every angle. It was a complex piece of industrial equipment, with levers, gears, and wheels I didn't understand. I was about to resort to trying to smash the floorboards around it when my light caught a small, metal plate riveted to the side of the hopper's main cylinder. It was a maintenance and safety panel. The text was faded and covered in grime, but I could make out a few key phrases. Operating instructions. Main gate lever. And then I saw it. Emergency purge chute. There was a diagram, a simple line drawing showing a lever on the side of the lower cone. According to the diagram, pulling the lever would open a small hatch at the very bottom of the hopper, releasing any residual contents. It was a safety feature, for cleaning or in case of a jam.
to reduce its weight. I followed the diagram and found the lever. It was a long, rusted metal bar tucked away near the base. I grabbed it with both hands and pulled. Nothing. It was seized with rust. I pulled again, grunting with the effort, putting all my weight into it. The metal groaned in protest. I braced my feet against the base of the machine and gave one last, desperate heave. There was a deafening screech of tortured metal, and then the lever gave way, moving downward a few inches. For a second, nothing happened. Then I heard a clunk from inside the chute, followed by a trickle of something. The trickle became a stream, then a dusty cascade. A torrent of ancient, dried-out corn kernels and grain dust poured from the emergency chute onto the floor, a golden, musty-smelling waterfall. The hopper hadn't been empty after all. I jumped back, coughing, as the air filled with a thick cloud of dust. The grain poured out for a full minute, forming a growing mound on the floor. And then, mixed in with the final rush of kernels, I heard a heavy, metallic thud. My flashlight beam sliced through the dust cloud. There, half buried in the pile of grain, was a dark green metal box. It was an old military-style ammunition can, heavy and solid. My breath caught in my throat. I scrambled forward, my hands digging into the grain, and pulled it free. It was heavy, much heavier than an empty can should be. A simple latch on the front held it shut. With trembling fingers, I lifted the latch. It wasn't locked. I knelt there on the dusty floor, the beam of my flashlight fixed on the container. This was it. The culmination of my father's desperate plan. The reason he'd sent me on this journey across the country. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what might be inside, and I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks of it. $100 bills, neatly bundled in paper bands. I'd never seen so much cash in one place. There must have been tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. My mind struggled to process it. This was the escape hatch he'd written about, a way for me to disappear and start over, a fund for a new life, untraceable. But there was more. Beneath the stacks of cash was another, smaller object. A fireproof document safe, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store. It was about the size of a shoebox, and it was locked with a 4-digit combination dial. A new wave of panic hit me. There was no key, no note. How was I supposed to open it? I tried the obvious combinations. 1, 2, 3, 4. My birthday. My dad's birthday. Nothing. The dial just spun uselessly. I felt my hope begin to curdle into despair once again. To get this far, to be this close, only to be stopped by 4 numbers. I sat back on my heels, exhausted and defeated, the beam of my flashlight playing over the gray metal box. I thought about my dad. I thought about his letter. He was a man who planned everything. He wouldn't have led me here only to leave me stranded at the final step. The combination had to be something I could figure out. Something meaningful. I thought about his quiet habits, his love of numbers, the little phrases he used to repeat. And then one memory surfaced, clear as day. I was about 10 years old, struggling with a math problem. He'd sat down next to me at the kitchen table. "Everything comes back to the beginning, Leo," he'd said, tapping his pen on my homework. "The first principle, the starting point. The first step is the most important one. The beginning, the starting point." My eyes darted around the cavernous warehouse. Then I remembered. The deed. The very first thing I'd looked at. The document that started this whole journey. I scrambled back to the office, my heart pounding with a new, fragile hope. I found the deed where I'd left it on the desk and carried it back to the grain pile. I unfolded it under the flashlight beam. Miller's Feed and Grain. And there it was, the address. 1487 Ridge Road. I hurried back to the safe box, my fingers clumsy with anticipation. The first step is the most important one. The beginning. The address. 1487. I carefully turned the dial, right to 1. Left past 1 to 4. Right past 4 to 8.
left to 7. I pulled the small lever next to the dial. It clicked. The sound was small, but in the vast, silent warehouse, it was as loud as a gunshot. The lock had opened. For a moment, I just knelt there, my hand on the lid. This was the true core of the secret. The money was a tool. This box was the reason. Taking another shaky breath, I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no jewels, no gold bars. It was filled with paper and plastic. On top was a thick, bound ledger. Beneath it were several file folders filled with documents, bank statements, transaction logs, corporate filings. And at the very bottom was a small, micro-cassette tape, the kind used in old dictation recorders. Tucked into the spine of the ledger was another envelope, smaller this time. And another letter, the final one. Leo, if you've opened this box, you are a better detective than I gave you credit for. Or maybe you're just more stubborn. We're both Millers, after all. The money is yours. It's untraceable. It's the money I managed to claw back from them, through methods I'm not proud of, before I shut down the whole system. Think of it as restitution. You can take it, Leo. You can walk away from this building, from this town, from this whole mess. You can go to college, travel the world, build a life for yourself anywhere you want. You would be honoring my memory by living a full and happy life, free from all this. There is no shame in that choice. I want you to know that. Your safety and happiness are all I ever wanted. But there is another choice. This box contains the other part of your inheritance. The ledger, the files. That's the evidence I took with me all those years ago. It's the proof of everything they did. It implicates powerful people. People who are still out there. The tape is more recent. It's a recording of my last conversation with them. I wanted you to have it. I wanted you to hear it so you would understand the choice you're making. You can take this evidence to the authorities. Mr. Abernathy is a good man. He was my father's lawyer before he was mine. He's old school. He can be trusted. This evidence will not just bring them down. It will posthumously clear my name and nullify the fraudulent debt on this property, making it truly yours, free and clear. But it's a dangerous path, son. These people will not go down quietly. Exposing them will put a target on your back. It will mean a life, at least for a while, of looking over your shoulder. It means choosing to fight instead of choosing to flee. I cannot make this choice for you. It wouldn't be fair. All I can do is give you the options your inheritance truly represents. A secret fortune and a clean slate, or a dangerous truth and a chance at justice. The easier wrong, or the harder right. There is no wrong answer, Leo. Only your answer. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. Your loving father, Robert. I sat there on the floor, the letter in my lap, the weight of his words pressing down on me. A choice. A real choice. He wasn't commanding me or pleading with me. He was trusting me. He was treating me not as a boy to be protected, but as a man to make his own decision. The money was a temptation, a beautiful, simple solution. I could walk away. I could be anonymous, safe. But as I looked at the small cassette tape, I knew I couldn't make the choice without hearing it. My phone was dead, but the office was a time capsule. I went back, the flashlight beam cutting through the dark. On the desk, next to the rotary phone, was a small, gray machine. A dictaphone. A micro-cassette recorder. I clicked the eject button. It was empty. It was as if he'd left it there, waiting. I carried it back to the main floor, inserted the tape from the safe, and pressed the play button. There was a hiss of static, then a click as a phone was picked up. Then I heard my father's voice. It was thin, tired, but clear. "You shouldn't have called this number," he said. Another voice answered, this one smooth, confident, and dripping with condescension. "Relax, Robert. Just a friendly check-in. The payment was a little light this month.
We were worried about you." "The arrangement is over," my dad said, his voice firmer now. There was an edge to it I'd never heard before. Not anger, steel. The man on the other end laughed, a cold, empty sound. "The arrangement is over when we say it's over. You don't get to just walk away. Not again. We know you're sick, Robert. We know you don't have long. And we know all about your boy, Leo. He's turning 18 soon, isn't he? A legal adult, all grown up. It would be a shame if the sins of the father had to be visited upon the son." My blood ran cold. He said my name. That smug, venomous voice said my name. There was a long pause on the tape. I could hear my father breathing, a slow, ragged sound. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "You will not touch him. You will not go near him. You will not say his name again. If you do, the world will burn down around you. I don't care what happens to me anymore, but you will not touch my son." "Big words for a dying man," the voice sneered. "I'm not the one you should be afraid of," my dad said, and the weariness was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated menace. "I'm a dead end, but the things I've put in motion, they don't stop when I do. So you have a choice. You can take what you've already taken and disappear. Or you can push this. And if you push, you'll find out what happens. Stay away from my son." Then the line went dead. I clicked the stop button. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. I was shaking, not from fear, but from a strange, fierce pride. That was my father. That was the man behind the quiet, gentle facade. A lion, a warrior who had spent his last ounce of strength forging a shield and a sword for me. The choice was no longer a choice. The money on the floor meant nothing. My father hadn't run. He had stood his ground right to the very end. How could I do any less? How could I take the escape hatch he'd built for me when he had left me the weapons to win the war? All my life, I'd felt like I was drifting, a piece of debris in the current of other people's decisions. Karen's indifference, my father's illness, the faceless system that was now labeling me an adult. For the first time, I had agency. I had a choice between running and fighting, between being a victim and being my father's son. I stood up, my body aching but my mind clear for the first time in years. I knew what I had to do. I packed the ledger, the files, and the tape back into the fireproof safe. I left the cash in the ammo can, hiding it back under the pile of grain. That was a decision for another day. Today was about justice. I walked back into the office, found Mr. Abernathy's card, and dialed his number. It was the middle of the night, but I didn't care. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello? Mr. Abernathy, it's Leo Miller." "Leo? Son, it's 3 a.m. Is everything all right?" My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of the scared kid who had called him from the motel. It was calm. It was steady. It was the voice of a man who had found his purpose on the floor of a derelict feed store in the middle of nowhere. "I'm fine, sir. Better than fine. I'm at the property in Montana, and I'm not selling. I need to see you, as soon as possible. I have something my father left for me, something you need to see. It's about his debts." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the gears turning in his lawyer's mind, the surprise at my tone, the weight of my words. "Where are you, exactly?" he asked, his voice now wide awake. "I'm at home," I said, and I realized as I said it, it was the truest thing I'd said in my entire life. Mr. Abernathy arrived 2 days later. He flew into Butte and rented a car,
pulling up the gravel driveway in a clean, sensible sedan that looked completely out of place against the rustic backdrop of the feed store. He was a man in his late 60s, tall and thin, with a quiet, observant face. He stepped out of the car and looked at the building, then at me, and a flicker of something, surprise, maybe respect, passed through his eyes. I had spent the 2 days cleaning. I'd found a broom and swept the office, clearing away a decade of dust. I'd wiped down the desk and the chair. I'd opened the office window, letting in the clean mountain air. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was an act of claiming the space. "Leo," he said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm. "You look different." "A lot has happened," I said, leading him into the office. I had the safe box sitting on the desk. I didn't say anything. I just opened it and gestured for him to look inside. He spent the next 2 hours poring over the contents. He read my father's letters. He examined the ledger, his eyes sharp and focused. He looked at the files. Finally, I gave him the microcassette recorder, and he listened to the tape, his face an unreadable mask. When he was done, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking older and more tired than he had when he'd arrived. "My God," he whispered. "Robert, that brave, foolish man." He looked at me. "Your father was one of the most honorable men I've ever known. I handled his father's estate, and I handled his. I thought I knew him. I had no idea." "What does this all mean?" I asked. "Legally." He took a deep breath. "It means this is a hornet's nest. The men your father was involved with. I recognize some of the names and shell corporations in this ledger. These are not small-time crooks, Leo. They are powerful, well-connected people. This will be a fight. But it's a fight we can win?" He looked at the evidence in the box, then back at me. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "With this? Leo, your father didn't just leave you evidence. He left a meticulously crafted, undeniable indictment. This ledger is the roadmap to their entire criminal enterprise. The fraudulent loan on this property is the loose thread that will unravel it all." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "This is dangerous. But yes, with this, we can win." The legal battle that followed was long and complex, and most of it happened far away from me, in lawyers' offices and courtrooms I never saw. Mr. Abernathy was true to his word. He worked with federal prosecutors. The evidence my father had so carefully preserved was like a key turning in a massive lock. Indictments were handed down. The smug, confident man from the tape, a high-flying investment banker, was arrested. His empire, built on threats and extortion, crumbled. As a result, the loan from the fictional Sunstone acquisitions was declared null and void. The liens were lifted. The deed to Miller's Feed and Grain was cleared. It was mine. Truly and completely mine, free of any debt. My father had not only given me a sanctuary and a choice, he had, in the end, given me a clean slate. I never touched most of the cash in the ammo can. I used a small portion of it for what I needed. I bought a used truck, some tools, and enough supplies to make the office livable. I spent that winter in the feed store. I patched the roof. I replaced the broken windows. I shoveled the snow from the driveway. The work was hard, my hands were raw, but for the first time in my life, I felt grounded. Each swing of the hammer, each nail I drove, was an act of building my own future. I started spending time at the Garnet Grill, the diner Sal had told me about. At first, the locals were wary of the quiet kid who was living in the old Miller place. But slowly, they started to talk to me. An old rancher named Dale gave me advice on fixing the plumbing. The owner of the diner, a woman named Maria, started saving me a piece of pie at the end of the night. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was becoming a part of the place. One evening, sitting at the counter, Dale asked me what my plans were for the feed store. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe tear it down. The land is worth something, I guess. He shook his head, stirring his coffee. Be a shame. This valley needs a good feed and hardware store. The closest one is 60 miles away. You get that place up and running, even on a small scale. You'd have more business than you'd know what to do with. I looked out the diner window, toward the dark shape of the building on the edge of the valley. It didn't look like a ruin to me anymore. It looked like a promise. It looked like a beginning. Today, I'm still here. The work is far from over. The main warehouse is still a huge, daunting project. But the office is my home. The lights are on. The heat works. I've started clearing out one of the front bays, with plans to open a small hardware supply in the spring. I'm not just my father's son anymore. I'm the owner of Miller's Feed and Grain. My father gave me a choice between running and fighting. For the first time in my life, I chose to stand my ground. And that's what this place is. It's my ground. It's the foundation my father laid for me, built not of wood and nails, but of sacrifice, courage, and a love so fierce it reached across death to give me a second chance. A home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's the place where you decide who you're going to be. What did this story teach you about home? Or about the legacies our parents leave us, the ones that aren't always written in a will? Let me know in the comments below. I read every one of them, and your stories matter. And if you believe in second chances, and in finding strength in the places we least expected, hit that subscribe button and join this community. Because we all have a story about finding our way home.